Thanks so much for joining. I know you're super busy with your startup, but your topic is very, very interesting, career-wise for teenagers, but also it has a massive impact in their future lives. So I don't know if you want to talk about your past so far, the work you're doing with smart cities and IoT right now, but whatever it is, I'm sure it's going to be very relevant wisdom. So thanks for joining, and the screen is yours.
Okay, so I'll start a little bit about myself. I think that helps put, when we talk about learnings, that puts it in context. I started, when I started my career, I was actually working in R&D for Motorola. I had computer science degrees from Penn State University. And I spent the first year working there. And as a computer scientist, what I was basically doing was sitting in a corner, designing network architectures. The marketing people would come and say, here's what the customer wants. And I kept sort of building and evolving this system of networking. After a year doing that, and I worked really, really hard, but the company then canceled the project because they discovered that by putting all these requirements together, the product was too expensive. So somehow the marketing people had never thought that price would be an issue, or if they did, they never told me what the targets were. So when they canceled the project, I basically felt a little disappointed. I was probably a little stronger than that, that I'd spent a year doing this, and then it just got thrown away because some other team hadn't thought to ask about pricing targets. I realized that when I looked around, there's a lot of R&D being done, development being done, that if they're given bad requirements, it ends up being wasted, because just like me, my experience showed that's what happens. So I actually sort of redefined myself, and I moved out of R&D and started going into product management, in the hope that, well, I figured if I talked to customers, if I had more face-to-face interaction, I could be the one capturing requirements, give them to the R&D people, explain what had to be done, and everything would be much more effective. So I really started down this road, and like a year into it, I sort of said, look, I need to redefine myself and take my career in a new direction. So don't be afraid, certainly, of doing that, and realize if you're on a path and you think there's a better way, a way that you yourself can provide more value, embrace it and go for it. I was at Siemens for about 5 years doing product management. Maybe it was a little bit longer. And I switched companies again. There was some new technology coming to market, and Siemens wasn't all that interested in the new technology. So I switched and I went with Rockwell. Rockwell merged with Alcatel. It became part of Alcatel, and later Alcatel-Lucent, when Alcatel and Lucent merged. I started doing product management for basically new technology programs. But through my career there, I evolved, and I started, because I was sort of at the cutting edge of where technology is. I started doing more strategic planning, marketing strategy, and eventually been doing global strategic marketing. So I had a team of 40 people spread all around the world. And we all interacted. This is like maybe 10 years ago. We all interacted virtually like we're doing now. After my period at Alcatel-Lucent, and I was there for a while, I think it was almost 30 years, I needed to change. So again, I redefined myself, and I basically went to the University of Southern California. I took my lessons learned in the real world, and I taught marketing to the MBAs. But I was also director for the Institute of Communication Technology Management, which is a research organization that, at the direction of the members, we sort of investigated new technologies and how that might affect business, or how business might change the way we use existing technologies. So that was kind of a really interesting position. While there, The technology we thought about, one of the projects we worked on, I saw had really huge commercial prospects. So after a while, I was there for 6 years, and then I left and I started my own company, and I'm the CEO now of I3 Systems. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the product that we're working on, but I will talk a little bit about it. You don't need to understand the product, but I think the number one thing that is really important for people is to understand the problem that you're solving. You really need to understand it. And we're all solving problems all the time. I think if you probably sat back and thought about it, you could think of every waking moment you're solving a problem, whether it's how do I get to work and you get in your car and drive, whether you're the problems your clothes stink so you have to wash them. But in a work setting, you're solving a problem. Maybe your manager gave you the problem and said, here's what I want you to work on. But the manager is solving a problem. So one of the things you're trying to solve, besides just the problem he told you, is how do I make the manager succeed, because he's in charge of a bigger problem. And if I can take care of my part of it, the bigger problem gets easier to solve. But always be trying to understand the problem and how whatever the problem is you're working on fits into the larger context. Because if you start to understand that, instead of just taking direction from somebody and doing what they tell you, you can actually start thinking about, well, here's maybe a better way to solve the problem. Here's something that people haven't thought of. Here's a better way to address the situation. And that is an incredibly valuable skill to have if you can contribute that way. The problem we set ourselves, I3 Systems set ourselves to solve, is most smart cities, most IoT applications are defined around an application. Whether that's, all right, we want to manage street lights better, we want to do something else, we want to worry about how do we manage vaccine distribution. But what they'll do is they'll define the problem around an application, and based on that, they'll say, all right, now here are the sensors, here's the technology we need to deploy to collect the data that lets the application do its thing. The problem is that if you start having more and more applications, each of these application device sets becomes a data silo. So if you're feeding traffic light data to a traffic light management system, that's well and good, but the information stays inside that little bubble. And what we wanted to do was evolve the system. We think there's a better way of doing it by using the technology we're developing. If you can use a device so that it's not tied one for one with an application, the device, when you look at the financial, what does it cost to deploy a device? You divide it, you look at the benefit of all the applications that the device supports instead of just one application. So that means that the cost, and does this provide a benefit for deploying the device, actually goes down, because you can divide a much bigger benefit number by the cost of the device. And that improves the return on investment, which makes people happy. It also means a lot of IoT and data-driven applications that did not make sense before, financial sense, suddenly begin to make sense. So we really open up the market in the sense of IoT, smart cities, and things like that. The other side of the coin is that when we talk to people who do applications that are dependent on data, we find that those companies spend a large part of their time trying to identify the data they need, where can they get it, and then building relationships with those people to make sure that they have a constant flow of data. Excuse me, a constant flow of data to support the application. And it's really a significant amount of time they do working on the data. So by putting I3 in the center, we can actually make it easier for applications to find the data they serve. So we end up, the problem we're solving is actually two problems, one on the application side and one on the device side. And that's kind of what I3 is all about. Now, if if you take I3 and sit it inside of an existing IT data structure, I3 sits between the data lakes and the communications, the connectivity infrastructure. So by putting it in there, we actually stimulate a lot of activity in the area of big data. We stimulate a lot of activity in data intelligence and data analytics. We stimulate activity in the device owner. So we see ourselves, part of our goal, our mission is trying to grow these markets for other people. But in the process, as they're doing this, they buy and deploy I3 systems as well. So that's kind of where we're at. An example, just to make it a little clearer, the sanitation trucks, the garbage trucks in the city of LA have between 4 and 6 video cameras on them. Right now, the Department of Sanitation uses those video cameras to sort of monitor driver safety. But they realize that that video camera is taking pictures of a whole lot of other stuff. And if we stopped thinking about the garbage truck as a Department of Sanitation asset and thought about it as a city asset, you can do so much more with very little incremental cost. For instance, as the trucks are driving through the streets, if you see graffiti, we can configure the camera to say, hey, there's some graffiti there, send out a crew to clean up the graffiti. Right now, the city has a bunch of people driving around in trucks, well, a few anyway, looking for graffiti, and when they find it, they make a phone call and schedule a team to go out and clean it up. Effectively, those people, if the garbage trucks start taking over that role, those people can be reassigned to do another project. The same cameras, they can detect and see overgrown vegetation, which might be a permit or a health issue. So you send out a team to take a look and see if it needs to be cleaned up. But you can also look at potholes and roads and things like that. So we've basically taken the garbage truck and made it into a city asset. So that's just an example of what we're doing and trying to put around it. You don't have to understand so much the technology as much as sort of the thought process that we're looking for problems and ways to do things better. And that's really the secret, I think, to sort of understanding where opportunities are. I did put together a list of 10 things that I've sort of learned as I've progressed along. One of them is to know your customer. Now, I have a very loose definition of customer. If you work for your boss is your customer. He's giving you money and you do work for him. So know your customer. If the customer's outside the company, maybe it is a real customer that's buying product from your company. But know the customer and be able to think about the problems like I just outlined, but think about the problem from this perspective of the customer. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking about the problem from their viewpoint, but you have to see the problem from their eyes. And that means you have to understand them and how they think about things. Number 2, I said, is don't do your job. And I put quotes around it. I'm not saying don't really do your job, but think not just about your job, but how your job fits in the role of the team you're with or in the company you're with, and do your job, but do it in a way that you make the team successful. If you do your job and you're successful, but everybody fails, the effort you put into your job really didn't matter. So you have to think bigger picture than just what your boss has told you to do. Understand how it all fits together. Number 3 I put down was think forward. If you're given a task or you're doing something, it's often people think about it as I'm solving this problem, and they think about the world as it is today. Which means if the world changes, something happens, a pandemic, an earthquake, or even just a new chip comes out, some new technology, new people come in, think about the problem and solve it in a way that your solution does not evaporate over time. So be thinking forward. Number 4 is be curious. Some people have asked, and when I'm looking to hire people, curiosity is something I look for in the interview. but feel free, ask why something's being done. Why do we do it this way? If you have a suggestion, to a better way to do it, think about that and offer it. But accept also that you might be wrong. I mean, a suggestion's a suggestion. A lot of them are wrong, but every so often you're right. And those are big things. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be wrong when you're suggesting something. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It never ceases to amaze me how people, like, you go through a meeting and at the end of the meeting, you're walking out of the room or walking with somebody and you'll say, hey, did you understand that? And they said, no. But they didn't raise any questions. They didn't ask for explanation. You learn a lot, and you shouldn't look at asking for help as a sign of weakness or whatever. Really ask for it. The number 6 is integrity matters. People who exaggerate or are even dishonest, what that does is undermine trust. If your team, your customers don't trust you, they will begin to discount your contribution because they'll figure some amount of it is not true. It's not going to happen. Trust is an important thing in the workplace, between coworkers, between customers, between partners, between management. And I think, how do you build trust is an important factor. And as we go forward, we'll see it becoming even more important. Networking is important. Whether you're finding a job, if you have a good network, that makes it easier. If you're trying to find customers, having a good network, it makes that easier. If you have an idea and you just want to bounce ideas off of somebody, if you have a network, it's easier to find somebody to give you feedback. Or if you're thinking about making a career change, if you have that network and have people to ask for guidance, it's really helpful. So throughout your career, always be thinking that the people you meet, you want to stay in touch with them, because some point in the future, they might need you or you might need them. And just even, and it needs even tangentially, even if it's just support. I know one of the earlier speakers talked about the importance to never stop learning. I think everybody should take as an objective to learn something new. And again, I'll say that different people learn different ways. So how you learn something new could vary a lot between people. Some people might learn best by reading books, by reading newspapers, some by watching a webinar, some just by having a conversation with your friends and talking about something that is educational, that you learn something you didn't know before. But always be trying to learn something new. And not just necessarily in your field, but open your blinders and think about how other things are happening in the rest of the world as well. I put down, maybe that you could make this higher, but family is important. Try, as you go through your career, you have ebbs and flows, successes and failures. Your family, you need that support structure there to support you through the hard times. So they are important. They help you continue to move forward. But the sidebar of that is that your family is most supportive if you're supportive of them. So don't think of the family support issue as being a one-way street. It's really a two-way street. You have to put in as much as you get back. And my final point here, I'd say, is money's not everything. That's kind of important. Your goal as you go through your career is trying to provide long-term value, even if sometimes you take near-term hits. That might be okay if longer term it ends up to be positive. I mentioned my career in one of the first slides. I'll point out that I think every job I've ever taken was a pay cut. I took a pay cut with it. And I took that pay cut because I saw there was an opportunity for me to grow as a person if I made the change. So by taking a pay cut, I was basically investing in my future. So I think that's something to sort of think about as well. It's not just money that you're looking for. And if that's what drives you, you'll probably end up down a dark road someplace. All right. With that, I'll say, I mean, open up if anyone has questions or want to talk about something, that's fine.
Jared, thanks so much for that. It's really nicely structured. I would have a question related to if you're into a career that heavily involves technology, how much do you want to work for someone else until you feel ready to do something as an entrepreneur? Because it's really, really hard, right? You're out of university and say, I want to start a company doing IoT. It's like, good luck with that. You really need to have a career with Motorola and developing software, and then you kind of learn from the big mistakes of corporations, because otherwise the chances of you succeeding are very, very small. That said, the youngest billionaire in the world started developing LiDAR technologies after university, and hey, no, has done quite well. But this is statistically very unlikely to happen. So, what is a fine-tuned balance that you think that can be used as an algorithm, as an example for, yeah, let me work for a big telco, a big tech company for 5 years, and then I'll see if I'm ready to move on to something else, even if that involves taking the pay cut, right, to increase your lifestyle. But what are your thoughts along those lines of working for someone else versus now it's time for me to give it a go?
So I would say, well, first off, being an entrepreneur, starting a company is really hard. Comparing what I do, the amount of work I put into my company compared to when I work for somebody else, it's much, much more effort. Um, and there's also, while the rewards are potentially there, there's a pretty high risk that it will amount to nothing. And you have to sort of accept that. In contrast, if you work for a company, and it could be a large company, but even a medium or even a smaller company, if you're working for a company, there's more stability there. You have a steady paycheck. You can do things. Your life is a little more manageable because you're working in a much bigger team, and if you get into trouble, there's a lot of resources there to sort of help you solve the issue that you're dealing with. So that's there. And you have to look at those two things as being very different. Um, but that's just the way it is. I've always looked at it, and I don't know if I can say this is my advice, but the way I've looked at it is that if I can find something to do with a big company that I'm interested in and it satisfies my needs at that time, I've been better off, I think, going to work for a large company. And I say that a lot of friends who went off and did entrepreneurial things early actually suffered. I mean, they spent time, their company went out of business or this or that. So if you can find, and I'll be careful how I say this, if you can find fulfilling work with a company, that's a really good thing to do. It gives you experiences you can build on. And since it's fulfilling, you're going to be happy there. Now, obviously, if they're giving you things that you're not finding exciting, challenging, innovative, if you hate your boss, that's an issue. And maybe you should be looking to change jobs to go to another company. But if there's no company that's sort of trying to do what you want to do, I think that's when you start thinking about possibly being an entrepreneur and starting a company. You have a great idea. Nobody knows how important this is going to be yet, but you believe in it. That says you probably should start thinking about being an entrepreneur. The only caveat I would put on that is if you are an entrepreneur, you've got to think about how are my team going to support themselves while the company is sort of beginning to mature. There are some people, I mean, I'm lucky enough to be able to try and build my own company, to be working on my own company. But for some people, that might not be an option. Um, and I accept that that's just the nature of where things are.
That's really great points. What tends to happen, I guess, if you're working on the technical side, and that was the beginning of my career, I was doing integration testing. I was the head of the test lab for a giant corporation, the biggest cable operator in Europe. And I was really blind to everything else that I couldn't see. It was just like human resources, whatever, declaring your taxes or raising the funds, because it's never really been part of my environment. And as an independent consultant later on, I had to interface with the marketing department to deliver projects at a much higher level. And that was such an eye opener, right? And it took me a very long time to understand how complex the machine truly was, because I came from the technical side. I was not like it was working with strategy and building new corporations. And if you can start a career doing that, no, more power to you. You get to see more things sooner in your career. But what I've seen happening before, that's to be um, get the good grades, go to the right university, make sure that you have the soft skills that people appreciate to get the best possible job to recognize company. Also, those recognized for being great places to work, right? No, this can be measured. You can go to lots of, I think Glassdoor is a good portal for this, and try to figure out, is this a place that gets good feedback from the employees as well? And then you learn the skills with them paying to train you, because they have to. They want you to do something specific, so they have to put that in the cost side. So that's not you paying, but it's definitely you benefiting from that. And pay attention. Like, try to figure out, um, is there a need? I mean, is there something that looks or sounds really foolish that no one seems to be doing, because it's so important for this consumer type or for this type of corporation? And at that point in time, you have the skills, you have the connections in a network, and you can start doing that on the side, right? So you basically generating a buffer, because you have most likely to bootstrap. You have to know, if you start as an entrepreneur, you can't start with zero in the bank account, because that's going to fail very fast. So you sort of need to pay your dues by working for those larger mid-sized corporations, where you can identify problems you're capable of solving because of skills, but also because of a network. And at that point in time, I think is when a jump towards entrepreneurship can be tried more safely. So, what are your thoughts about that one?
So I think what you said is right. That's all true. Um, I would add, though, that to sort of learn those skills, maybe, I mean, you might think about not, I mean, do your day job. I mean, that's how you keep a roof over your head and get your money. But maybe at night you freelance or work for a startup at night or weekend, and that's kind of something that you can do to give you some um, stability in your life while still sort of testing things out. And even if that night and weekend stuff, maybe it's even a nonprofit, or maybe it's a volunteer organization. Maybe you volunteer with one of the groups that write standards. But there are lots of ways to sort of get those experiences that help you develop the skills that might come from outside the job place, and be open and look for those things as well.
That's a really good point, especially for teenagers. I think that volunteering, doing nonprofit activities, sort of shields you from financial liabilities, right?
Yeah.
The nonprofit has no assets. If you're doing something to help others, you have to go through the same thought process of what is a need that is not being properly fulfilled right now, which I'm in a position to help. And it doesn't have to be your nonprofit, it could be someone else's, local, regional, national, international.
Yeah.
And that's how you're going to be sharpening your skills to be in a position to have more of a 360-degree vision of what it means to become an entrepreneur, not only in technology, but basically everything. So I'm a big fan of getting teenagers to join nonprofits, because there's a very clear path there to valuable skills that will be recognized.
It's skills, and also that's a way to sort of build your network too, because it exposes you to people that you'd otherwise might not be exposed to. And those connections, I mean, the people you meet, you learn from their experiences, and they might be at some point in your future ways that you can't imagine, um, have a big influence on what you do in your career.
Yeah, and
Or maybe they're even customers for your future business that you haven't even thought of.
yeah, I agree with all that. And I'll add the point that if they know you from nonprofit work, volunteer work you've been doing, chances are they really like you, right? They go like, okay, this is the kind of person I want to hang out with, because it's someone who thinks about values of society rather than just personal profit and benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And that is very important, because people trust, if you're just there for profit or whatever, and people begin to understand that, they're going to assume that you're going to do all you can to extract as much profit out of them, that you're not going to be there long term if there's a better opportunity around the corner. But that understanding of who the person is very important.
Yeah, it's really great and super useful. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.